It's with great pleasure that I can introduce Gary Guthart, the CEO of Intuitive Surgical, for our keynote interview tonight. We've been wanting to have Gary at this event for a while now, and it's a real pleasure to have him.
Thanks, Brad.
So you were born and raised right there in Intuitive's home base of Sunnyvale. Tell us a little bit about your early days and what got you interested in the path you're on now.
Well, like I think most of the people in the room, I'm a technology person by interest and attributes. So nothing luckier than being born in Sunnyvale, California in 1965. So I grew up right next to all the defense companies. My father was an electrical engineer, and it was fantastic. It turns out our company is headquartered in the town I grew up in, not having anything to do with me. It was just serendipity.
What's it like working in the town where you grew up?
It's changed a lot.
Yeah, I bet.
So town we grew up in were small houses. My dad bought his house for 1 year's salary. He moved in the second house that he still lives in today. It's a couple miles from my house now, and he bought that for 2 years' salary. And you can't get anywhere near that these days. I think we've turned into Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
Not that I don't love Los Angeles. Fantastic.
So you got your start in science, or at least in working in science, as a NASA intern while you were still in high school. Tell us a little bit about that.
So one of the great things of growing up in a tech town, a quiet kid. I liked science a lot, and I had a math professor in high school who my folks both worked in those days, and he goes, "Well, I'll sign you up. He signed me up for an internship without telling me. We have a NASA base across the street, NASA Ames." And he says, "Hey, I signed you up for this internship. I want you to go." So, all right, I got on my bike and I rode across the freeway over there to NASA Ames. NASA Ames is where they test experimental aircraft, and they have their shuttle simulation. And I met this person that he had known, and her name is Sandra Hart. She ran the shuttle simulation and workflow lab. So I got introduced as a high school student to software programming of flight simulators and human performance, human factors testing for pilots. And I thought at that time, before then, I had always worked, and parents didn't give me any spending money, not like these days, so you had to work for it. I always worked in delivering papers and all that kind of stuff, and I got this job in engineering and science to work with shuttle pilots and program computers, and I said, I'm in science and I'm never going back. That's it, I'm done.
So once that interest was sparked, led you eventually to a PhD in fluid mechanics, and you were thinking about a life in academia. So what happened to turn you in another path?
Yeah, so I thought, I was going to rebel from my father. He was an electrical engineer, and I thought, he's an electrical engineer. I got to plant my flag somewhere far away from him. So I went to fluid mechanics, and I thought I'd be a professor of that. I went to Caltech here in Southern California, and I thought I'd be a professor. It'd be great. So one of our prior students was a professor at MIT. He had left. And I thought, I'll go be a postdoc. So I graduated. I flew out, got on a plane. I'd been in school for undergrad 4 years, graduate school for another 9 years. And I sit down with him, and he says to me, his name is C.C. May, and he says, Gary, I'm not going to offer you a postdoc. And I'm going to tell you why. I don't think you make a good professor. And, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what, it's got to be 24 years old, 23 years old. And I'm upset. And he goes, look, you're a smart enough guy, that's all right. But you don't like to write. You're going to be a math professor, you're going to write. And you like to talk to a lot of people. You're always talking to somebody. You're a math professor, you're not talking to everybody every minute. You've got to be sitting in your office and things. So, of course, I'm a young man, and you turn around when that happens, and you think to yourself, I'm going to show him. So for a couple of months, I was like, nobody's going to tell me what to do, right? You do all that. And then after a couple of months, I realized, this person did me an enormous favor, because he was right. And he saved me an enormous amount of heartache to get there. So I scuttled those plans, and I went to work for SRI International up in Menlo Park in applied research lab doing acoustics for large-scale systems. And that changed the course of my life. So I owe him a big... most people, when that happens, somebody comes to you and asks for advice. All of you get asked for jobs, I imagine, at some point. And the easy thing to say is, I don't have space right now. And he could have said that. I never would have thought twice about it, and I wouldn't have gotten the job. But he didn't do that. He kind of did the hard thing. And I'm actually sort of forever grateful to him for telling me a hard truth early.
So now you're at SRI, you're working on active acoustics. Tell us how a chance meeting at a pickup basketball game was an encounter that wound up changing your life.
Yeah, so anybody know SRI? You familiar with the place? Some. So SRI, it was one of the first 3 nodes of the internet. Never met Al Gore while I was there. It's known for speech recognition technologies. So Siri on your iPhone came out of SRI, different group. And there was an early lab there for robotic-assisted surgery. It was built by a fantastic engineer, a guy named Phil Green. He was a towering person in ultrasound and in telerobots. And it was being run by a gentleman named Ajit Shah at that time. And I was younger and fitter, and we used to play basketball on the court there at SRI International at lunch. And we're standing on the sidelines because we like to play, but we weren't very good because we're kind of scientists after all. And he says, hey, I'm struggling with my project. You know anybody who knows this kind of nonlinear math? And I go, hey, I know that kind of nonlinear math. Why don't I come and help you? Only in Menlo Park are you ever going to have that conversation on the side of a basketball court. So I go to see him, and in the lab, he's got a really early prototype of a telerobotic system. And he says, why don't you try to do the following? And he has a rat, and he's dissected it, and he gives me a set of microscopes and a set of surgical tools and says, try to sew together the femoral artery of this rat under optical guidance. It was brutally hard, of course. And I was pretty good at assembling things. I worked in my garage all the time. I worked on models. I'm not bad with my hands, and it's just brutal. And he sat me down at their prototype and said, now try it here. And I sat down and I could do it. Magnification, tremor filtration, a lot of the things that have to do with robotics. And I didn't know robotics before then, but I stood up from that. And it was another aha moment, like the NASA moment. And I said, I'm going to get involved in that project because that clearly has something going on.
So you did that for a little while, sort of at SRI. In 1996, you joined Intuitive. 14 years later, you're running the whole show. What was it about the surgical robotic space that really grabbed your imagination?
So I started to get to know surgery there at SRI. We started working with surgeons at Stanford, and that was really exciting too. For those of you, any surgeons in the room? Clinical folks? Clinical trial folks? We have to have clinical trial folks. No? Anyway, you start working with surgeons, and it's exciting. And these are driven, deep human beings. And that was interesting and exciting. So I knew I was in. And second thing is I'm an analytic person, right? Math background, data. So I started digging through the data on outcomes. And the reality is that surgical outcomes are a lot better than they were 100 years ago. And an enormous need for improvement. I'll just give you a couple. One of them, my wife went through breast cancer, kind of a tricky one, 2012. And it turns out she had positive surgical margins after surgery 3 times in a row. So positive surgical margin means that they did a resection and left cancer in. And so it took 4 surgeries to get it out. And you look at that, and you go, that's just crazy. It turns out that positive surgical margin after lumpectomy, right, breast cancer, a large incident rate in women, 1 in 8 in Northern California, it's 33%. A third of women who have a lumpectomy will have some cancer left behind. For those of us, men, prostate cancer, take the prostate out, positive surgical margin after prostatectomy is above 20% today. So 1 in 5 men will get a phone call. You know, I had that surgery to take that cancer out? Well, we didn't get it all. So it's clear to me that it was a technology challenge and an enormous opportunity for improvement. And the scale of it, for those of you, so how many folks are engineers, technology folks? You know, you think about what we expect out of our technology products for performance. If your iPhone dropped 1 in 10 phone calls, most of us would smash it. We'd just be beside ourselves. And these are complication rates that are in 30%, 20% today. Standard of care, the best that people can do. So that's an enormous challenge, and I'm up for a big challenge. I just was fired up about it.
So bring us up to speed on the latest over at Intuitive. What's the latest and greatest out of Sunnyvale?
So we're working on a set of things. You know, we start with the hierarchy. First is surgery is both really important to people There's a lot of it done. It turns out, I asked the question of our analytics team, what's the average number of times an American will see a surgeon in search of cure? So how many times do you think you'll see somebody, well, they'll take a sharp knife and seek to cure you with it? So I would have guessed 3, but the average time you would see it is 3, and I was off by a factor of 3. The number's between 8 and 9. So on average, you'll see somebody with a knife 8 or 9 times. It's a ton. The first thing is, what can we do about outcomes? The outcomes I just described to you. The second thing is variability is enormous. So how important we're a tool manufacturer. So think of us in golf. We're the ones who make the golf clubs. The surgeons are, of course, the golfers. And what's more important, the club or the golfer? The golfer by far, right? Tiger Woods will win with 50-year-old golf clubs. So what's the variance in surgery? If you ask yourself, how important is it to choose the right surgeon? Is there data on that? Turns out there is. And if you just think in quartiles of skill, if you happen to, for complex surgery, if you happen to see somebody in the bottom quartile, lower 25% in skill, they are 3 times as likely to give you a complication, and you are twice as likely to be hospitalized than the top quartile of skill. So you'd say, okay, outcomes, first of all, outcomes can be better. Second of all, the variance among surgical teams is enormous. So there's that. The third thing that all of us know is that payers are constraining total cost per treatment episode. And so we have to do all of this innovation and lower the total cost to treat per patient episode. There are a bunch of people who think that the way to do that is to make things as cheaply as possible. Product cost matters, but innovation is going to be a lot more important. So we've got to drive that part. The last thing is that these products work in a really sophisticated ecosystem of professionals. Anybody who's working in the hospital realizes these aren't consumer products. Highly trained professionals who have a million things to do and 50 different interacting software systems that they have to treat. So you've got to put it all in there. So that's what we think about. And I'll take you through some of the things we're working on, if that's all right. I have some video. Here we go. Okay, light source at the end. So the 2 things that look like ears on that endoscope are a light source, stereo endoscope, distal chip. You can see it's fully articulating, so it looks like a cobra head. The instruments are 6 millimeter diameter, fully articulating. So here you're simulating working down, for example, inside somebody's throat if they have throat cancer at the back. You can imagine it going inside the umbilicus, inside your belly button, and then fully rotating all the way around the inside of the body. I'll show you a next one as well. Staying on this idea of how do you get in and out of the body with less damage to healthy tissue. If you're trying to get better outcomes, then what you want to do is avoid making large incisions in people. Of course, a lot of the complications come from making large incisions. So this one looks at how to detect lung cancer early. And it turns out if you're in a high-risk population, meaning that you've been exposed to environmental toxins or you smoke, 15% of us in this room in a high-risk population will have nodules on our lungs that are of suspicious intent. I took a chest x-ray of you, I'd find something to be worried about. And you want to explore that. You want to see what that looks like. So this is a product that's a computer-controlled, navigated, robotic catheter, 3.5 millimeters diameter, fully sensed all the way along its length, goes down transbronchially, has a preoperative CT scan that's segmented and made into 3D. And it navigates the surgeon to the endpoint, and you can sample inside the body. You can see the sampling, do in situ or in OR pathology. That's what the sensing looks like. So it allows you to target and sense its shape all the way along its length. Turns out today the alternative is to keep getting CT scans every 6 months, waiting to see what happens. And if, of course, that's a malignancy, you're waiting and it's growing. It turns out my mother had exactly this issue. So she went through 3 cycles over 6 months. It turns out to be malignant, and after 18 months of waiting and watching this thing, finally had a surgery to take it out. So the goal here is, can we get in there and do early detection? That has gone through clinical trials. It's working its way through clearance. And you can imagine other things to do with it. The other thing we're doing is looking at ways to look at tissue more than just with white light imaging. This is a near infrared fluorescence imaging system looking at a common bile duct. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. You're going to see surgical video. Common bile duct injuries happen when the surgeon doesn't see the duct and cuts the wrong thing. And it looks pretty obvious here. looks like you're seeing this duct right in the middle. But it turns out not everybody's anatomy is the same. And so with this contrast agent, they'll show you here an aberrant duct, something that branches off the main duct that you actually have to ligate. You can't let leak. You wouldn't have been able to see it without a contrast agent. And that leak is an extremely serious complication, re-hospitalize you for weeks, and it's a $100,000 event, let alone the patient suffering. So the idea here is, can we show the surgeon more than what they can see with the naked eye? And we're using contrast agents to do it. I'll show you another version, and this one in lymph nodes. So again, another surgical video. This one in an animal model. And the idea here is to find lymph nodes, and you see it there, a beacon. So this is a contrast agent that's been administered into a bed of a tumor, into the tumor bed after the tumor has been resected. And injecting into that tumor is this agent which drains into the lymphatic channel. And here it just radiates. It's just a beacon for the surgeon to do the dissection. So you can imagine it's faster, the surgeon's more confident, there's less manipulation of tissue and removal. And so we're working on these combined drug device ideas here where we can essentially take, and this isn't my phrase, it's a borrowed phrase, smart spray paint. The idea that you spray things in that matter, they bind to tissues you care about, and it tells the surgeon, take this out and leave this alone. You're looking for those kinds of opportunities.
And then you get all the margins.
And there you're going after the right margins, or you're saying, hey, there's a nerve here, please don't cut the nerve. So people will talk about, for example, hey, we should digitize surgery, that idea. Okay, well, we put a computer in the loop between the surgeon and the patient starting in 1999, and you throw off a lot of data. Many of you work on things that have sensors and throw off a lot of data. It's okay to digitize it, but it's not enough. You have to make something simple and intelligent. And so the idea here is intelligent surgery. We're really trying to say, how do we take the extraneous information out? How do we keep the noise level down and highlight those things that really matter? That's what we're really going for. This is a version, this is looking at a kidney from the inside. And this is using just better simple idea rendered well. An idea of using preoperative imaging the right way. So this is a preoperative CT scan of a kidney with a tumor in it. You see the tumor in yellow. Accessed through the internet. Offline, there's machine learning techniques that create that model you see in the right. It's placed in the field, and then it just tracks where it's supposed to go. So in a sense, there's not something revolutionary in the thought, but beautiful, clean execution. Again, our whole idea here is, how do you make these things really simple and accessible, right? Again, back to intelligence. We want intelligent informatics. I'm really, really concerned about overwhelming surgeons with data. So a lot of us work on data, a lot of us work on algorithms, that stuff's really important, but pruning is really, really important. And this is the thing that we really work hard on. And I think some of the skepticism around AI and healthcare may be, how do you prune to get what you need? I'm dominating your questions here. Final thought, and
Quite all right.
I talked about variance, how there's this huge distribution between surgeon skill. Well, how do you help? And so, of course, flight simulation, surgical simulation. It's kind of not rocket science. Seems like a good idea. And so we work with partners to do this. We do some of these apps ourselves, and there are about 4 companies that also write apps for us, or with us for our platform. And so it looks pretty good. This is a hernia repair simulation. And no surprise, and that makes some good sense. What's powerful about this is that you can aggregate the data. We now have, I think, 20,000 or 30,000 surgeons who have trained using this simulation. And you can start creating statistics that look at surgical skill. And now feeding back to the surgeon, here's where you are relative to your peers. And it's a good motivating tool. So those are the kinds of things that we're driving.
So the competitive landscape for Intuitive has changed a lot in recent years from no competition. When you look ahead, what do you what's your take on the new entrants into the space? And not that you would be afraid of the competition, but how do you look at it?
I think it's a sign of good things. It's inevitable. I think that, first of all of us are customers in our own lives, and customers like choice. and they'll be interested. The second thing is, of course, it validates that there's some value here, that people are finding an opportunity to do more. And I think that's also important. The technologies are interesting and hard. We see, I've been at this for a while now, joined Intuitive in 1996. Since then, from there till now, I've seen about 25 robotic surgery companies emerge. I think 4 are still active and 21 have gone elsewhere. So it's a hard set. It can be done, but it's a lot of work. The level of detail and precision required to deliver these products with quality and consistency is really difficult. New entrants are coming. They'll try new ideas. I think that folks will be interested in that. Some of them will be natural competitors. Some of them will be natural collaborators with us. We'll see. We'll see where they take it.
So when you look ahead and you think about new technologies to integrate into your surgical robotics, what gets you the most excited?
I think there's a couple of things that are really interesting. I think one, outstanding design for usability is really key. So a lot of people are excited about data and analytics. I am likewise excited. But data and analytics, and I'm a quant, I came out of this math space. But data and analytics without really understanding deeply the customer environment, their workflows, managing what they need when they need it, is essential. So I get excited about how people are thinking about that, what some of the innovations are. I do think that there are informatics opportunities from in-OR computer vision capabilities. These robotic systems are natural sensing systems. We've interconnected ours. We've been the Internet of Things for the last decade. And so we have big data sets now that allow us to provide our customers with insights. I think those insights are exciting and interesting. Perhaps the most interesting thing to me is even our most strident critics, and of course for those of you who are in business, it's good to talk to the people who like you, but it's more informative to talk to the people who are critical of you. Our most strident critics, if you ask them, forget about today's products. Do you think there'll be more computer-aided intervention in your hospital in the future or less? Do you think there'll be more robotics or less? Even your most strident critics will say more. And so the mind shift is now coming that says, this can help.
Well, that's all I've got. Do we have any questions for Gary from the audience?
Sure. So the question was just about how is this technology changing care in less developed parts of the world?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways that I think it gets pretty interesting. In the near term, you can think of internet technologies allowing things like surgical Skype, the idea of Skype in surgery. And in fact, we have a partner in Southern California here who has built with us a telemedicine system that allows people to project into operating rooms through their mobile devices into a robotic surgery over the internet. Pretty cool. And right now it's Skype. It's video, voice, the ability to share text and telestration. The technology from a math point of view for doing remote surgeries of that sort exists. They've been proven out over the years. In fact, almost 15 years ago, somebody did a transatlantic surgery using telerobots. We did one at SRI for the military. So that could come over time. I think that's one. I think there's a bigger opportunity, and that is that as these systems become fully designed and somewhat intelligent, I don't think they think for themselves, but they can give you context-sensitive help. You ought to do this next. I think that the learning curve for complex surgeries can decrease, and your ability to train more people more quickly will rise. And so while I'm kind of not a techno-optimist, I think these are surgeries fundamentally a human problem. If we can make our products a lot easier, and if we can understand the workflow and the environment a lot better, we can actually bring more professionals into surgery, which in emerging economies is the major issue. You need more healthcare professionals, more surgeons, more nurses. So I think both sides can work.
The end of your video looked like it had virtual reality being used in it. So 2 questions. One is, are the devices or the mechanisms that you're using haptic to give feedback to the surgeon or the operator? And then are they also capable of being used for training purposes?
Yeah. First thing is our systems today have haptics capability in them, both synthetic forces and reflected forces. Synthetic meaning we can inject a force based on what the computer thinks is going on, and reflected, meaning that if something external to the product gets hit, it can reflect that back. It isn't exquisitely sensitive, and we have developed technologies and research technologies that become quite sensitive. So haptics is part of it. What you saw in that last video is actually entirely a training program, and the training program has haptics in it. You can tune it up and tune it down, you know, force reflection in those joysticks. So yeah, I think it matters. Feedback in training is really interesting, and I think we can learn a lot from the aviation industry there, and we have been pursuing that aim.
I just wanted to ask, how many years do you predict that some of these surgeries are going to become fully autonomous?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to answer. I don't know the end point. I can guess at the sequence by which these technologies will arrive. How long it takes, tough to predict. So the first thing, you think about a car, it's I think a decent analogy. The first thing you want to do is put some aids in it. So adaptive cruise control being an example, or blind spot monitoring, or lane keeping. You haven't taken over the whole driving task, but you're starting to help. And we're doing that already. I think that those technologies exist. We have situational awareness for the surgeon to be able to show her or him some things that may be out of their field of view, but can indicate an impending issue, just like blind spot monitoring. Then you can imagine advice, warnings that are saying, hey, I'm looking at what you're doing. I'm using computer vision. I have some inference as to what's happening in the case. You might consider the following, or kind of a watch out. Shake the rudder that you may not want to do this. I think that's the next generation of technologies. I showed you that flexible catheter technology. I think those ones admit automation more quickly because it's a much more constrained space. You're navigating a tube, whereas if you think about some of these surgeries where you're having to sew something all back together again, it's a much harder task. So I think it's going to come in segments like that. I think we'll have surgeons guiding these for quite some time, just as we have pilots in our commercial airlines for quite some time, because we look for the redundancy and the flexibility that humans bring.
Thank you for your insights. One thing come to, where do you see the latency that you need from the end to end? What is the range? Because as you mentioned, for some procedures, maybe the latency of that catheter is not that a big a deal. But what's the range of latency for that catheter application compared to something that is really like a more maybe heart surgery or something?
Yeah, it's a fair question. You know, it depends a lot on the scale that you're operating on. So, and also a little bit of kind of the stiffness you need out of the system, the mechanical and the full control system stiffness that you need. Generally speaking, that these things are working at servo rates or update rates modestly under a millisecond. You want to be at that state. You know, there's the human performance side of this too, which is, you think about telesurgery at a distance, to one of the prior questions. You have the time of flight issues, and time of flight issues from here to San Francisco won't be a big deal, but you have the processing time issues. It's actually the computers that are the major issue for some of these issues, for some of these time of flight problems. And above about a millisecond lag, a good human operator will start noticing it, it's starting to bother them, and you get to 10 milliseconds lag, it will be really bothered. If we go to deeper technical depth than that, I'm going to phone a friend.
Thank you very much. Where do you see artificial intelligence fitting into the future of Intuitive?
Yep. If we just kind of define it as, so you know, this is where I get prickly, because it's a big category term, and we're in a little bit of an AI bubble. So if you start with, let's go with big data. We sensorize everything. We put it in the cloud. We do simple math on it to understand population variance of systems or of people. Let's say that. We've been doing that for a while. It's important. More of it will happen. Most health organizations are capable of doing it, and most companies like us. So I think we're there. Let's go one layer up and talk about neural networks, random forest algorithms, things that are machine learning but not really intelligent. They're massive correlation engines that are using training data, let's just say. So in that sense, you're looking at computer vision. Extremely important. We have some brilliant scientists who are working on it. Think about radiology applications where your radiologist reading a mammogram, and they're starting to show that these programs, these computer vision programs, have as good predictive accuracy for reading an X-ray as a radiologist does. I think that's the future of a lot of our space. Makes a lot of sense. Put a layer on top, and you start saying, let's do unstructured learning for the free text in the notes of the electronic medical record. That'll be a while. Really messy. Data quality is really messy. Interpretation engines are really messy. So I think there's research there that's interesting, but it's not a small problem.
Well, with that, how about a nice hand for Gary? Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure.